On the morning of March 7, 2012, in a modest home in suburban Atlanta, Georgia, Claire Sanders was sitting in her living room. The news had come like a hammer. Her husband, Daniel Sanders, had been having an affair. But not just any affair. It was with someone unthinkable, her twin sister, Emily. For Claire, this betrayal was beyond imagination. Yet she knew that this discovery was only the beginning. The funeral of their mutual childhood friend was just days away, and Claire had a plan, an elaborate scheme to expose the affair in a way no one would forget. Claire Sanders had always been the dependable one. Growing up, she was the glue that held her family together, the twin who ensured stability in a household that often felt unpredictable. Born just minutes apart, she and Emily were inseparable as children, always dressed alike and doing everything together. But their personalities couldn't have been more different. Claire, with her calm and nurturing nature, had always taken on the role of protector, while Emily thrived on attention, effortlessly charming anyone who crossed her path. From a young age, Claire knew she wanted a quiet, steady life. She wasn't interested in excitement or chasing fleeting moments of joy like Emily was. Instead, Claire dreamed of a family, a comfortable home, and meaningful work that would keep her close to the people she loved. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to change directions constantly. She went through phases. One month, she was passionate about art. The next, she was moving to a new city to pursue a career in real estate. And while Claire admired her sister's adventurous spirit, it sometimes left her feeling inadequate, as though her more traditional life paled in comparison to Emily's daring choices. Claire met Daniel when she was 22. He was everything she had ever wanted: grounded, hardworking, and reliable. He was a financial consultant, a man who made her feel safe in a world that could be unpredictable. Their relationship moved quickly, and within 2 years, they were married. They bought a charming house in a peaceful suburb just outside of Atlanta, where they raised their 2 children and lived the life Claire had always imagined for herself. Emily was never far from their lives, though. She frequently visited, especially after Daniel started earning more, and their home became a cozy gathering spot. Emily's presence brought a certain energy that Daniel seemed to enjoy. Claire, however, brushed it off as sibling rivalry. It wasn't until years into their marriage that Claire started noticing the subtle changes, the way Daniel seemed more distracted when Emily was around, the way Emily's laughter lingered a little longer when Daniel made a joke. But Claire trusted her husband, and she trusted her sister, even as she quietly began to feel like a third wheel in her own marriage. It was 2010 when the first real crack appeared in Claire's perfect life. Emily had moved back to town after a business deal fell through, and she was staying in an apartment not far from Claire and Daniel's house. Claire was used to Daniel helping Emily with odd jobs, given her single status. She didn't think much of it when Daniel offered to fix the dishwasher in Emily's apartment one evening. He had done it before for neighbors and friends. It was what good husbands did. But something felt off that evening. Claire had been running late from the bakery, and as she parked her car outside Emily's building, she saw Daniel's car parked at an odd angle. There was nothing particularly alarming about it, but it left her feeling uneasy. She decided to head up to Emily's apartment to see what was taking so long. When she opened the door, she found Daniel hurriedly buttoning up his shirt, a flustered look crossing his face as he mumbled something about the job taking longer than expected. Emily stood in the kitchen, looking equally uncomfortable, her eyes not meeting Claire's. Claire didn't push for answers. She wasn't ready for what she already suspected. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that the bond she had with both her husband and her sister was changing in ways she couldn't control. But Claire, being the practical one, knew better than to react impulsively. She spent the next few months carefully observing their interactions, taking mental notes of every small, suspicious detail. She told herself she was just being paranoid, that she was imagining things. But the lipstick on Daniel's shirt one evening told a different story. It was January 2011, and Daniel had just come home from what he claimed was a business meeting. Claire noticed the faint smudge of Emily's signature red lipstick on the collar of his shirt as he tossed it into the laundry. But instead of confronting him, she quietly let it slide. She knew that if she was going to find out the truth, she needed to play the long game. Confronting them without proof would only make things worse. She decided to wait, to gather as much evidence as she could before taking any action. By the summer of 2011, Claire had caught Emily and Daniel in several more suspicious situations. There was the weekend Emily claimed she was going to a spa retreat, only for Claire to find out from mutual friends that she had been spotted at a hotel just outside the city. The same hotel Daniel had supposedly been attending a work conference at. Then, there were the overly affectionate touches between them at family gatherings, the stolen glances when they thought no one was looking. Claire had nearly caught them several times, but each time they had managed to slip away without fully exposing the truth. The death of Sandra, their mutual childhood friend, in early February 2012 changed everything. Claire saw this as an opportunity. The funeral would be held on March 10, 2012. A large gathering of all the people who mattered in their lives. It would be the perfect moment for Claire to reveal what she had known all along. She began planning meticulously, determined to expose Daniel and Emily's affair in the most public and dramatic way possible. In the weeks leading up to the funeral, Claire worked silently, collecting evidence. She printed copies of the texts she had found on Daniel's phone, ones Emily had sent late at night, full of romantic overtures and promises. She found emails, too, which detailed their plans to sneak off together. Claire was methodical in her preparations, knowing that the revelation had to be timed just right to have the maximum impact. She began to quietly distance herself from both Daniel and Emily, making sure not to tip them off about her intentions. The days leading up to the funeral were tense. Claire watched as Daniel and Emily continued their charade, unaware that their world was about to come crashing down. Claire, on the surface, remained calm and composed, but underneath, a quiet storm was brewing. The betrayal stung deeply, but what hurt more was the deceit from the two people she had loved most. By the time the day of the funeral arrived, Claire was ready. She had everything she needed to expose them, and she knew that once it was done, there would be no turning back. What will happen when Claire exposes her twin sister and husband in front of their friends and family? How will Daniel react when faced with the evidence? It was a crisp November morning in 2011 when the first of many small, comedic moments unfolded. Claire had been preparing the kids for school when she noticed Daniel's jacket hanging on the back of a kitchen chair. It was unusual for him to leave things out like that, as he was always meticulous about his appearance and belongings. Absent-mindedly, she grabbed the jacket to hang it up, but as she did, a small piece of paper slipped out of the inner pocket and floated to the floor. Curious, Claire bent down to pick it up, and her heart briefly skipped a beat when she saw that it was a love letter. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded the paper, expecting the worst, only to be greeted with what could only be described as embarrassingly amateur poetry. The letter was from Emily, comparing Daniel to the moon and herself to the stars. The metaphors were so poorly crafted that, for a moment, Claire couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't just that her husband was cheating on her with her own sister. He was doing so in the most ridiculous way possible. Claire tucked the letter back into the jacket without a word. She didn't confront Daniel, not yet. Instead, she let the moment pass, solidifying in her mind the growing absurdity of their affair. It wasn't anger that Claire felt in that moment, but a sort of detached amusement. The fact that Daniel and Emily thought they could hide something so glaringly obvious made it almost comedic, though the pain still lingered just beneath the surface. A few months later, in early February 2012, another incident pushed Claire closer to her breaking point. Daniel and Emily had planned a weekend getaway under the guise of a business trip. Daniel had been vague about the details, but Claire knew better than to ask too many questions. She had learned to play the part of the oblivious wife, all the while quietly collecting evidence to use when the time was right. The trip, however, didn't go as smoothly as Daniel and Emily had hoped. Halfway to their destination, Emily's car broke down on a lonely stretch of highway. Claire's phone buzzed late that evening, and to her surprise, it was Daniel asking for a favor. He fumbled through his excuse, explaining that he was on his way to a conference, and Emily had just happened to be nearby when her car broke down. Could Claire come pick them up? Claire agreed, though not without a knowing smirk. When she arrived to find them both standing by the side of the road, Emily looking flustered and Daniel trying to play the role of the innocent husband, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The way they scrambled to explain away their situation was laughable. It was another piece of the puzzle, another moment that would lead to the inevitable unraveling of their deception. Claire quietly filed it away, her resolve to expose them growing stronger by the day. March 10th, 2012, arrived with a heavy sense of finality. The funeral for Sandra, their mutual childhood friend, had brought together friends and family from all corners of their lives. Claire, dressed in an elegant black dress, arrived at the church early, her mind sharp and focused. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, meticulously gathering all the love letters, text messages, and photos exchanged between Daniel and Emily. The evidence was undeniable, and today she would reveal it all. As the service began, Claire's eyes scanned the room, watching Daniel and Emily from a distance. They stood together, not too close to be obvious, but just close enough to make anyone who was paying attention suspicious. Emily, as always, looked radiant, her makeup flawless, her outfit meticulously chosen. Daniel stood beside her, his posture a little too stiff, his eyes darting around the room nervously. But no one else seemed to notice the tension. To everyone else, they were just two people mourning the loss of a friend. But Claire knew better. She had seen this act before. The subtle glances, the way Daniel shifted awkwardly when Emily brushed against him, it was all too familiar. The air in the room was thick with the weight of grief. But beneath it, Claire felt the crackling tension of what was about to unfold. As the eulogy ended and the attendees began to file out of the church, Claire moved with calm precision. She had prepared sealed envelopes, each containing copies of the damning evidence. One by one, she handed them out to the closest friends and family members, people who mattered, people who would feel the betrayal as deeply as she had. She watched as they opened the envelopes, their faces shifting from confusion to shock, their eyes widening as they read the scandalous details inside. The room, once filled with the somber murmur of quiet conversations, grew silent. Then came the gasps, the whispers, the furtive glances toward Daniel and Emily, who stood frozen in place, their faces draining of color as the realization hit them. They had been caught. There was no escaping it now. Claire stood quietly by the side, her expression unreadable as she watched the chaos unfold. The tension in the room shifted from mourning to disbelief as the whispers grew louder and the scandal spread like wildfire. Claire's heart pounded in her chest, but she remained composed. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when everything would come crashing down for Daniel and Emily. But Claire wasn't finished. As the buzz in the room reached its peak, she calmly made her way to the front. Without raising her voice, she delivered a brief, emotionally charged speech about betrayal and trust, not just in marriage, but in family. She spoke of the secrets people hide and how, no matter how carefully they think they've concealed them, the truth always has a way of coming out. Emily stood frozen, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Daniel looked equally stricken, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. They were trapped, exposed in front of the people who knew them best, and there was no way out. As Claire finished her speech and stepped back, the room remained silent for a moment. Then the whispers began again, louder this time, as people gathered in small groups, passing the evidence from one person to another. The funeral had become something else entirely, a scandalous revelation that would leave a permanent mark on everyone involved. Claire felt a strange sense of calm as she watched Daniel and Emily, their worlds collapsing around them. They had deceived her for years, but now, in this moment, The truth was out for all to see. The betrayal was no longer hidden in the shadows, and Claire had emerged stronger for it. In the days immediately following March 10th, 2012, the funeral that had once seemed like an ordinary farewell to an old friend transformed into a spectacle of betrayal and humiliation. The scandal of Daniel and Emily's affair spread through the community like wildfire. The funeral, which should have been a solemn gathering, became the talk of the town, and not for the reasons anyone expected. Claire, having held her composure throughout the entire ordeal, felt an odd sense of calm after the storm. But the real fallout was just beginning. Daniel, overwhelmed by the public exposure of his infidelity, tried to salvage what was left of his marriage. He had been humiliated in front of their friends, family, and neighbors, but his deepest shame came from the realization that his betrayal of Claire had been so thoroughly uncovered. In the days that followed, he pleaded with Claire to forgive him, to give their marriage another chance. But Claire, exhausted from years of emotional manipulation and lies, had already made up her mind. She watched as Daniel packed his belongings, quietly begging for her to reconsider, but Claire remained unmoved. This wasn't a moment of anger or rage for her. It was simply the end of a long chapter. The home they had shared for 10 years, the life they had built together, now felt like a lie. She was ready to let it all go. By the first week of April 2012, Daniel had moved out of the family home, leaving behind the remnants of their once perfect marriage. Claire didn't feel the need to explain herself to him any longer. She had exposed the truth, and now it was time to move on. Emily's reaction was no less desperate. She had always been the daring, reckless one, but even she couldn't have imagined the fallout from the affair. In the days after the funeral, Emily tried to reach out to Claire, sending her long messages, and even showing up at her doorstep on one occasion. She was humiliated, not just by the affair's exposure, but by the fact that the entire community now saw her as the villain in a story where she once thought she was simply pursuing happiness. But Claire had no interest in reconciliation. The bond they once shared as sisters had been irrevocably broken. Claire refused to answer her calls or open the door when Emily came knocking. By early May 2012, Claire had officially filed for divorce from Daniel, cutting ties with him as firmly as she had with Emily. It wasn't an emotional decision for her anymore. It was a necessary step toward reclaiming her life. Her lawyer, a kind but firm woman, guided her through the process. Claire attended the meetings with Daniel, but there was no longer any emotional attachment. Daniel seemed defeated, worn down by the public shame and his own guilt. But Claire kept her distance, remaining polite yet distant. For her, it was over. Emily, on the other hand, couldn't handle the pressure of living in a town where everyone knew her secret. By June 2012, she had packed up and left Atlanta. Claire never asked where she went. Emily's departure was inevitable. She had been ostracized by friends and family alike, her once glamorous reputation now tainted by the scandal. No one wanted to be associated with her, and she felt the weight of the judgment every time she left her apartment. For her, leaving was the only option. While Daniel and Emily's lives crumbled under the weight of the affair, Claire began to rebuild. She poured herself into her bakery, which soon became the talk of the town. People came not just for her delicious pastries, but also for the story. The funeral affair, as it came to be known, became something of a local legend. Customers would line up early in the morning, not just to buy bread or cakes, but to chat with Claire, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had so boldly exposed her cheating husband and twin sister in such a public and dramatic way. Claire found herself thriving in ways she hadn't expected. She channeled all of the emotions, the hurt, the betrayal, the anger, into her work, and it showed. The bakery expanded, her customer base grew, and soon she was hiring more staff to help manage the increasing demand. By the end of 2012, Claire had opened a second location in a neighboring town, cementing her status as a successful businesswoman in the community. But it wasn't just her professional life that flourished. Claire also found herself growing personally. Without the weight of her toxic marriage, she felt free. For years, she had been so focused on holding her family together that she had forgotten what it felt like to live for herself. Now, with Daniel and Emily out of her life, she rediscovered her love for travel, spending weekends visiting new cities and reconnecting with old friends. She even enrolled in a cooking class, something she had always wanted to do but had never found the time for. As the months passed, Claire's new sense of independence brought her peace. She no longer felt the need to look over her shoulder, no longer worried about what secrets might be hiding in the corners of her life. The funeral, though shocking and painful, had given her a clean slate. She had faced the truth head-on and come out stronger on the other side. In the end, Claire's story was not just about betrayal, but about resilience. She had taken control of her life, refusing to let Daniel and Emily's actions define her. And while their affair had its humorous and ridiculous moments, the seriousness of what they had done, the deep wound they had inflicted, was never lost on Claire. But rather than letting it consume her, she used it as fuel to rebuild, to thrive, and to move forward on her own terms. As the town continued to buzz with the story of the funeral affair, Claire remained a figure of strength and determination. Her story, while filled with betrayal and heartache, also became a lesson in the power of facing the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The secrets Daniel and Emily had tried so hard to hide had eventually come to light, reminding everyone that no matter how well hidden, the truth always finds a way to reveal itself. Check out another exciting case where a wife exposed her husband's affair at a family reunion. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates.